Hello, and welcome back to If This Is True. Now, you're going to need a stiff drink, I think, for this one, because I'm going to tackle food. It's not in any specific area, it's a general chat about how food got onto our shelves, the overview of ground where your seeds are to you finding it on shelf. And it is quite detailed. But I think after this chat, if you want to, we can dig into specific areas in other videos. But for now, I just want you to take in what I'm about to tell you and start thinking about the consequences, because we will destroy ourselves without question. It's just a matter of how quickly. In your local supermarket, the many thousands of products, nearly everything you see is controlled by just a handful of corporations. And even more alarmingly, did you know that due to this corporatized control of our food, over 75% of the world's food supply now only comes from just 12 plant and 5 animal species? That means that natural selection, diversity, and adaptation to changing environments, such as climate, has gone because governments and corporations have colluded to decide what's on your plate and how it gets there. And when traditions and communities are eroded in the name of efficiency, we become weak. We become so weak that survival of the fittest, as climate changes, as it always has, will no longer exist. We will have no way of coping. Corporate control over what we eat will indeed kill us off, and it started a long time ago. Today, what I'd like to do is explain how the power has shifted from local farms and local producers to a concentrated group of unelected corporations and their unprecedented control. I'm going to tell you about the hidden systems that dictate what you eat, how it's produced, the price you pay, not just in money, but in health and choice. And this isn't just a history lesson, although I also love history, a bit like science. It's a wake-up call about the future of food. And I promise it won't be boring, but you might need to pause and repeat the truly shocking bits. You might need a pen, because this is an utter shit show. The beginnings of mass food production started in the Industrial Revolution, and it transformed food systems forever. Before that mechanization, small-scale farmers and local markets were the backbone of agriculture. And yes, food supplies and their shortages were typical. And yes, often people didn't have enough to eat, and it often depended on the weather and how crap that was that season. This changed in the 19th century as factories emerged, producing canned and packaged goods on a massive scale. Railroads and refrigeration systems allowed food to be transported long distances, which broke the reliance on local supply chains, and particularly if those local farms failed that year. And the last industrial revolution absolutely changed our lives and well-being for the better. But then it ran out of control, because industrialization also marked the beginning of limiting consumer choice as corporations consolidated their power over the supply chain. Because by controlling production and distribution, corporations could dictate what products actually reached the market where you could buy it. And now today, seriously, just a handful of global corporations control almost 80% of the entire food supply chain in the West, from soil to table. And that's significantly reduced your choice. Take, for example, Arla. They've been in the news a lot in the last couple of weeks. They're one of Europe's largest dairy cooperatives, and it's introduced feed additives to their dairy cows to help with climate change. Even though they know, and science will tell you, that methane is reabsorbed by plants and animal-generated methane is entirely stable. They did it anyway. And they did it because there's extra profit in the value chain. They did it without labeling those changes on consumer products, effectively removing the consumer's ability to make an informed choice. The chat isn't really all about Arla because the problem is much greater than that. Arla's practice, though, highlights how corporations have not only shaped what's on our shelves, but they also influence legislation to protect their own interests and grow their own corporations, often at the expense of transparency to the consumer. Often, though, through WEF lobbying. Now, don't worry, we are going to get into the World Economic Forum later, but first let's go back to that history lesson. I love history. With the advances of factories and mass production came the rise of corporations beginning to shape those markets. And they began to consolidate power to control the supply chain on shelf, as Morrison's does very effectively now. Actually, let me stop here. Morrison's is a fabulous company because it has raised the level of particularly animal standards in farming over the years. They own the farm, they own the transport, they own the abattoir, and their products end up on their shelves. It's quite effective. Companies like Heinz, founded in 1869, and Campbell's the same year, started producing canned vegetables and soups. The vegetables that they could can and they could soup. They left the difficult ones behind. And sometimes those difficult ones were actually great for you. But I've digressed. Today, Heinz is part of Kraft Heinz, a company generating over $26 billion annually, and Campbell, still a major player in processed foods. Fast forward again to what shelves look like today, and it isn't the companies producing food being consolidated anymore because that's all been done. Now farmland itself is being consolidated. Let's think about that in the UK. So here, about 12% of the country's land area, so about 7.2 million acres, is owned by the top 50 landowners, including individuals. Hello, Charles. Anyway, him and charities and corporations, the concentration of farmland ownership is held within a small elite group. But the greater percentage of UK agriculture, it has about 209,000 farm holdings, consisting of 17 million hectares of land, which is 70% of the UK's total land area. So, consolidation is rife. It's huge. It's just at the beginning, but it's going to get much bigger because making larger plots of land creates efficiencies. They say that makes food cheaper, but they think we're idiots because we all know, right, that a lack of competition makes things more expensive. In Europe, this has already come to a head much faster than it has here, and concerns about land grabbing began to emerge in countries like Hungary, Romania, and Bulgaria, where foreign investors and agribusinesses have acquired significant tracts of farmland, very often displacing local farmers. And as you've seen, vast swathes of Ukraine, known as the breadbasket of Europe, have been swiftly bought up as desperate farmers flee their land or are shunted off to die at the front line. Recently, as you saw, farmer protests have continued across the European Union, highlighting the backlash against government policies which favour these huge corporate landowners. The EU's push to consolidate farms, pretending it's to modernise, have just fuelled the fears of forced land redistribution. See, large-scale farms provide more tax, are more capable of adopting advanced food production technologies. They require fewer moaning farmers and labourers, meaning they don't have such high labour bills. And as smaller farms are absorbed, Their surplus, inefficient land, the bits and pieces they've got that they maybe grew cabbages on, becomes ideal for non-agricultural uses. Things like solar farms, data centres and battery storage facilities. And in the Netherlands, the environmental reforms have already triggered mass protests because the farmers saw businesses such as Microsoft taking over farmland to build data centres. Parceling large swathes of land under a few corporates and selling off the smaller farm parcels for industrialization to support net zero was never voted for. And now, in lockstep, governments globally, often in partnership with large corporations, justify these changes as advancements for the greater good, emphasizing efficiency and sustainability. But in truth, it's really simply profit over the interests of citizens, transferring control from the public to a few unelected wealthy companies. Now, without us paying much attention because we're blinded by pretty packaging and comforting advertising, we've missed a very unnatural change from the very ground, the change of genetic modification. And this has been sold to governments and food standard agencies as a way of getting more and better food. But it isn't. Let's look at Monsanto, which is now owned by Bayer. This was an American agrochemical company who also specialized in agricultural and biotechnology businesses. And they were best known for producing the herbicide Roundup and developing genetically engineered crops. But in 2018, they faced litigation for cancer-causing chemicals from thousands of farmers, and it sold out very quickly to Bayer. Monsanto ceased to exist as an independent agency. But in 2008, Monsanto had patented genetic seeds. And those seeds were already planted on 80% of US corn acres and 92% of soybean acres globally. Well, what does that mean? Well, what it means is that seed patents allow corporations to dictate how and where seeds are used. So did you know that farmers are banned from saving seeds? So seeds that could have adapted naturally to the climate as it changes. So let's say you're a farmer and you have a great crop one year, even when the weather was really crap, and you decided to keep those seeds to plant again. Yeah, well, you can't. No. Instead, you must throw away your adapted seeds and rebuy the very same genetically altered seeds every planting season. And this madness has been enforced through legal battles where even the US Supreme Court upheld corporate control over patented seeds. And today, 4 companies, Bayer, Corteva, Syngenta, and BASF control 60% of the global seed market. Where don't they have control? Haven't covered Africa yet. But the rest of us, we're screwed. And this stranglehold on seed control significantly impacts farmers because their inability to reuse seeds that may have adapted to their climate and their environment limits their autonomy, their output, and it increases their costs, all the while benefiting corporations that enforce these contracts through legal and financial pressures. Does that sound equitable to you? Because it sounds like a massive corporate anti-competition thing to me. What would I know? And in Europe, we have the EU Seed Marketing Directive, which of course the UK absolutely adopted after Brexit. Of course it did. Why would we want autonomy? And this directive regulates the sale of seeds, limiting what can legally be shared or sold by individuals. It's outrageous because it stops the natural survival and adaptation of the fittest occurring seeds. The directive obviously heavily favours large corporate firms because compliance to the rules is really costly and time-consuming, and they can afford it. Yet all the while, they are undermining diversity and resilience in local food systems. Why don't our governments even question this? Are they thick or are they complicit? I don't know. So let's get back to that shocking statistic at the beginning. And it means that biodiversity is sacrificed for monoculture crops. What does that mean? Well, it means that plants and crops used in food have been stopped from naturally adapting to changes in the environment, including climatic changes. Over 75% of the world's food comes from just 12 plant species. And that makes them much more vulnerable to diseases and pests that naturally occur because our environments and our climates are constantly changing. And they're more vulnerable because genetically they can't adapt naturally. And depending on this, monoculture farming creates a commercial goldmine for agribusinesses, right? Because, and this is evil genius. I mean, literally, we need Bon Buddy music. This is how bad it is. You see, the lack of genetic diversity means that they become highly susceptible to those new diseases and pests, which is absolutely brilliant for the continuing profit of those corporations producing pesticides and herbicides, especially if both of those divisions are in the same corporation. Yeah, I know. Well done. Brilliant. Create the problem and the solution and charge both ends, including those unadaptable genetically modified seeds, because Bayer also controls the pesticide market, profiting from the very vulnerabilities they created in those seeds, in those grains, in those crops in the first place. Pharmaceutical and agrochemical companies develop and sell new pesticides, new herbicides, and new fungicides to address the diseases and pests their genetically modified seeds can't deal with. And then they blame it all on climate change. Can you see it yet? Nowhere is this more clear than the corporate agricultural takeover of Africa. And I'm not going to do this in this video, but I will cover seed control and the lie of development in Africa in a separate video coming soon. Because I love you, Africa. I love you. Right. Let me make this doubly clear for you. Visualize this. Visit any supermarket and you'll see hundreds of brands. And yeah, I know you think they all have their own personality and their own values. Some have really quaint names like Farmer's Market, making you believe that they're small or family-owned enterprises. But most of them are just owned by a few corporations. So Nestle alone owns over 2,000 brands ranging from Nescafe to Purina Pet Food, generating annual revenues of over $100 billion a year. Similarly, PepsiCo owns Quaker Oats, Walker's and Tropicana and has revenues exceeding $86 billion a year. And own label products, you know, the supermarkets you trust, well, they don't make their own products at all. They're made by businesses selling under brand names, and they're all sourced from the same factories and through the same processing plants. And there are also huge ranging fees, which means that smaller businesses that haven't joined in this scheme They have to pay for their place on shelves, and exclusivity contracts locking out small suppliers can't come close to competing against those global giants, meaning those giants have absolute control over your choice on shelves, and the farmers just can't compete. And as I've seen so many people calling for, the farmers to sell directly to them, look, their food would rot in the fields before they took enough online orders to cover it all. Plus, they'd have to invest in huge back office operations to pick, pack, and ship it all, as well as packaging stations, labeling, invoicing, stocking. It isn't a practical solution, not with carrots at 45p a bag. Farmers are funneled into the main supermarket chain because they really have no other choice. And startups or local producers, they may have superior products that they can sell at farmers' markets, but they're absolutely frozen out by the big players. I've recently heard politicians asking why there aren't more promotions on fresh food in supermarkets. And I have to tell you now, they're idiots because they have no idea of how this works practically in store. It isn't the supermarket who funds those promotions, it's the supplier. And whilst these deals are common on mass-produced food because there are hundreds of other products on the shelves to make up the loss, they're rarely, if ever, offered on fresh, locally sourced fruit and vegetables because the farmers simply can't afford to offer free products when their carrots are 45p a bag. And the result is that the market prioritizes industrial scale manufacture over local production. This is a really good time for me to point out again how utterly incompetent politicians are. I know. Anyway, back to food. So, local farmers face significant challenges meeting the pretty food standards imposed by supermarkets. So large amounts of fresh produce are rejected upon delivery for being too small or ugly or even too dirty. But in contrast, you see large consolidated farms with all of those advanced growing techniques are much better able to produce uniform crops that meet these stringent requirements. And so they don't suffer from the same delivery rejection. You see, they're making more and more profit because they have enough money to invest in newer technology, backed often by foreign investment firms. This stranglehold on shelf space and ground growth gives corporations immense leverage over what consumers buy, reinforcing their market dominance and marginalizing anybody new to market. And I refer you back to Arla here, because combined with their influence on food agencies, food labeling, and marketing regulations, they have almost total control, and you have no choice at all. DEFRA has just announced it wants to mandate the methane reducing additives in all cattle products by 2030. So you'll have no choice. And if you don't buy cattle products, then farmers will have to reduce herds. This is the pincer movement. Now, I'm not saying all change is bad. What I'm saying is that the pace of change hurts us. It hurts our traditions, it hurts our people, it hurts our communities and our values, and it hurts our health as we aren't able to naturally adapt. And it reduces job opportunities, and it completely narrows your democratic choice. When power is concentrated in the hands of a few, the social fabric of our food systems begins to fray, leaving communities with fewer and fewer options at higher and higher prices. But just when you thought it couldn't get any worse, it does. Ask yourself, why are processed foods so dominant? Is it really because we're all really lazy? Well, in part, I do agree with that. The attractive packaging, the use of the words natural and healthy, and of course the 2-minute warm-up in the microwave was heavily advertised as being the perfect way to cut down on needless kitchen time, particularly since governments had already forced women back to work. So women weren't at home cooking and looking after children. They didn't have time to prepare and cook anymore. And so we bought it. And now, even though the government says they don't really want us to buy it, it actually hasn't and won't do anything to stop it. And the answer lies in the profit and the jobs of the food chain, because packaged food loaded with additives and preservatives, so they last much longer than natural food, offers far higher returns and far higher taxes than single ingredient foods like fresh produce or unprocessed grains. They're less profitable. The meat industry is a perfect example of this. Traditional meat production generates profit mostly from the sale of just cuts like mince. Oh, I love a chili. Or steak. I also love a steak. Or they get profit from secondary markets like leather, glue, pig's ears for your dog. But processed meats and now the heavily pushed meat substitute products to save the planet significantly increase the value chain. What do I mean by that? Well, corporations add layers of profit by incorporating different suppliers of chemicals, flavor enhancers, preservatives, and all the other ingredients. See, each step from ingredient to supplier generates additional profit. And governments, of course, love it. Think of the tax. Instead of one business supplying the product, they've had 10 businesses contributing to the product. I'll give you an example, right? Beyond Meat, the leading producer of plant-based meat substitute, generates billions in revenue by creating highly processed products that they say are better for you and they're better for the environment. But it's a lie. This business model doesn't just benefit the manufacturer, it supports a network of suppliers providing specialized ingredients like genetic pea protein, food additives, stabilizers, as well as processing equipment makers and distribution networks and factories to make it all. Shh, government doesn't want to talk about it. Because the global packaged food market is valued at $3.1 trillion, that's today. And it's expected to reach $5.3 trillion by 2032. I thought we were supposed to be cutting down on processed food. Doesn't seem like it, does it? Because with growth driven by demand for convenience and shelf-stable products, governments and corporations don't really want you to change your eating habits at all. And they easily could, you know. They could easily bring in legislation to stop all of this. And meanwhile, single independent foods face bans to save the planet, as in the example of meat, which we've just discussed, leading to a decline in the market. No matter what they tell you, I guarantee they want you to buy more processed food. And the corporatization of food production isn't just an economic shift. It's a takeover of traditions and choices, of our independence and of control over our own health. We've seen how a handful of corporations manipulate everything from seeds in the ground to legislation that decides what ends up on your plate. And governments justify this as being better for the people, better for prices, but it's not. Our prices are going up. So who are they really serving? The billionaire CEOs or the communities left struggling to hold on to their way of life? Because this isn't about opposing change. As long as you voted for it, I'm okay. Even if sometimes we get it wrong, at least we had a choice, right? This is about resisting the pace and direction of change that benefits only a few and decimates the rest of us is about asking the hard questions. Why are our food systems more fragile than they were 200 years ago? Why are seeds controlled by chemical companies? Because that's what they are. And who the hell put them in charge? Because I didn't vote for it. Did you? Did you know that this legislation was happening? I didn't. And why is your choice as a consumer just an illusion? Because it is. And if this is true, and the facts are undeniable, then it's up to us to demand better. It's up to us to question the system and tell them that you don't want it to be like this, because food isn't just what we eat, it's who we are. Stand up to businesses like Arla, increasing their profit without even bothering to tell you, and then claiming you're the problem. It's the greatest misinformation of all. So that's it. That's my short overview on what's on shelves and my little rant. I am a bit ranty about this. I'm actually infuriated. Well, tell me what you think. How do you think it will end? What do you think is the majority we should even do about it? Yeah? Let me know in the comments. Like, subscribe, and let's always find the truth on if this is true. Thank you.